In a room filled with some of the most powerful and well-respected people, all eyes were on Barron Trump. A sharp comment had just been thrown by a professor, one aimed squarely at his father. Tension hung thick in the air, and the usual outcome seemed almost certain, a back and forth, maybe even an outburst. But instead of the expected confrontation, something completely unexpected happened. Barron stood there, calm. His response wasn't anything anyone had imagined. "Thank you for being here today. I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this so far, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps this going, and I truly appreciate it." Now, let's take a closer look at what happened in that room. The charity event was one of those high-profile gatherings, where influential figures from all walks of life converged. Donald Trump was there, as expected, his presence hard to ignore. Beside him stood his son, Barron, quiet, observant, staying out of the spotlight, watching the room with the kind of calm that made him seem older than his years. For a while, the evening moved along smoothly. Casual chatter, light laughter, familiar faces exchanging pleasantries. But then, a sharp remark cut through the room. A professor, known for his blunt style, made a comment about Donald Trump that hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. It was the kind of remark that could have led to an outburst, a public clash. People froze. The tension was thick. You could almost hear the collective breath of the room as everyone waited for the reaction. Would Trump retaliate? Would this escalate into something more? But instead of the expected confrontation, Barron, standing quietly near the back, did something unexpected. He turned toward the professor with a calmness that contrasted the rising tension. His every move seemed deliberate, as if he was aware of the eyes now on him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't challenge the professor. What he did instead was something that caught everyone off guard. Without saying a word, he shifted the mood with a gesture that spoke louder than anything anyone could have said. A simple, yet profound response that seemed to disarm the situation entirely. The room was left in stunned silence. It wasn't the confrontation everyone had braced for. It wasn't even a defense of his father. It was something else entirely, something that left everyone wondering if they had misjudged him. How often do we find ourselves caught in moments where everyone expects one thing, but what actually unfolds is far different? When was the last time you handled a tense situation in a way no one expected? I want to know, how do you approach those kinds of moments? As the evening went on, the hum of casual conversations filled the room, but then, it happened. A professor, known for his strong opinions, made a remark that instantly cut through the noise. It wasn't aimed at Barron, no, the words were meant for his father, Donald Trump. The comment was quick, sharp, and to the point, dismissing Trump in a way that seemed almost intentional, as if to make a point in front of an audience. The room fell into a strange stillness. People exchanged quick glances, unsure of what would come next. It wasn't the first time Donald Trump had been the subject of criticism, but there was something about this moment, something in the way the professor's words were delivered, that left everyone uneasy. The subtle confidence in his tone, the way the insult seemed to hang in the air, made it feel different. It was calculated, yet quiet, aimed not just at Trump, but at his legacy. No one had to say anything for it to be clear. For a split second, there was a flicker of uncertainty in the room. Would anyone speak up? Would someone challenge the professor? Or would the situation diffuse itself, as it often did at these events? But what happened next was anything but expected. Everyone's eyes were on Barron now. Was he going to stay quiet? Or would he defend his father, as so many might have imagined? The tension, once again, hung in the balance. Think about it, how many times have you witnessed a moment like this? When the smallest action can tilt the entire room in one direction or another? When the tension builds, and you realize that a simple word or gesture could change everything? So, what do you think? Was the professor out of line? Should Barron have responded differently, or did he handle it the way you would have? The professor scanned the room, almost looking for some kind of approval, expecting people to nod, maybe even laugh. After all, that's what often happens when someone challenges a figure like Donald Trump. But as his words hung in the air, Barron, who had been quietly watching everything unfold, did something no one anticipated. It wasn't a burst of anger or a defensive retort. Instead, Barron stood up, slowly and deliberately. The eyes of the room followed him. There was a stillness in the air, almost as if everyone was waiting for a response that matched the moment's tension. Would he respond with defiance? Would he attempt to challenge the professor? But Barron didn't speak. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked toward his father, his movements steady and purposeful. When he reached him, he placed his hand on his father's shoulder, no words, just the simple weight of his presence. It was a quiet act, almost imperceptible to some, but to those who saw it, it spoke volumes. In that instant, everything seemed to pause. The professor's words were still hanging in the air, but Barron's gesture had shifted the entire energy of the room. The silence was heavy, not awkward, but reflective. Everyone seemed to process what had just happened, but no one knew how to respond. It's curious, isn't it? How the smallest actions can carry so much weight, how a simple moment can shift everything. How often do we find ourselves in situations where we expect things to escalate, only to be met with something completely unexpected? In those moments, what do we choose to do? Do we let the chaos take over, or do we, in our own way, break the cycle and say something without saying a word? What do you think of Barron's response? Would you have handled it differently? Do we sometimes overlook the power of silence and simple gestures in moments of tension? Let me know in the comments, how would you have reacted in Barron's shoes? The room, once filled with hushed whispers and quiet discomfort, now seemed still. The professor glanced around, his uncertainty clear. Was the moment over, or had he made his misstep even worse by targeting Barron's father? His words had been bold, but now there was a shift in the air, something far less tangible, yet far more powerful. It wasn't Barron's silence that left its mark, it was his quiet presence. The kind of strength that didn't demand attention or fanfare. The strength that comes from simply standing firm, in the face of everything else around you trying to stir up conflict. He didn't say a word, but in doing so, he said everything. For a fleeting moment, it felt like the room collectively held its breath. Laughter stopped. Side conversations ceased. All that was left was Barron's calm, unshaken demeanor. No defense, no retaliation, just the act of being steady in the midst of a storm. It's strange, isn't it? How we often expect power to be loud, forceful, or dramatic. And yet, here was Barron, not reacting, but changing the course of the room simply by refusing to escalate things. There's a certain kind of authority in that, a reminder that not every situation needs a response, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not react. What does that tell us about how we handle moments of tension in our own lives? Do we always feel the need to speak out or defend ourselves? Or is there strength in choosing not to react at all? Think about the last time you were in a situation where things felt off, or where someone said something cutting. How did you handle it? Did you let silence speak for you, or did you feel the need to push back? The professor, visibly caught off guard by the unexpected turn, seemed to falter for a moment. He searched for the right words, but they didn't come easily. His apology was quick, almost mechanical, as though he was trying to regain some sense of control over the moment. But it was clear the damage, or rather the shift, had already happened. What struck everyone wasn't just Barron's quiet response, but how the room itself began to change. It wasn't the words or the tension that had the power to shift the energy, it was Barron's stillness. The room seemed to exhale, but no one could quite explain why. The professor's attempt to undo the moment felt inadequate. In fact, it almost made the situation more awkward, more fragile. No one needed to say it, but everyone felt it. Barron had done something that no one else could have. It wasn't just about defusing a moment of tension. It was about owning the space, commanding it with nothing more than calmness and restraint. It's fascinating, isn't it? How often do we think that words are the answer in tense situations? How many times do we try to fix something with a reaction, when sometimes the most powerful response is simply doing nothing at all? How many times have we misjudged situations, thinking they required more than just presence? Think about it, when was the last time you were in a situation where you felt the pressure to react, but instead, you chose to stay grounded, to remain calm? How did that affect the people around you? Did it change the conversation, the mood, the outcome? The incident, though brief, didn't fade away quietly. Within moments, photos and videos of Barron's gesture were circulating online, drawing attention far beyond the room. But what truly stood out wasn't just his calm. It was the simplicity of the moment, no grand speeches, no dramatic gestures. Just one quiet act that spoke louder than anything else could have. What made this so powerful wasn't the size of the gesture, but the way it cut through the noise of everything happening around it. Barron didn't try to make a statement with words. He didn't raise his voice or confront anyone. He simply stood, remained composed, and, in that quiet act, sent a message that many felt deeply. The message was simple: in a world often filled with noise and conflict, sometimes the most profound response is one of peace, of stillness. But it wasn't just the media that took note. People who had been mere bystanders during the exchange began to reflect. Conversations shifted. Some whispered in hushed tones, others stayed silent, perhaps processing the weight of the moment. In those quiet exchanges, it was clear, Barron had done something different. And it wasn't just about how he handled that specific situation, it was about the broader message it carried. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often do we get caught up in the need to fix things or escalate situations, when what's needed most is simply a moment of quiet presence? How often do we misunderstand the power of calm in the face of tension? And when was the last time we saw someone handle a difficult situation with the grace and stillness that Barron showed? It's a question worth considering. Can we all learn to respond with the same poise when confronted with conflict or criticism? How might that shift the dynamics around us? In a world that constantly pushes us to react, to make our voices heard, Barron's response stands as a stark contrast. It wasn't a defense of his father. It wasn't a reaction to the professor's words. It was a quiet moment that spoke volumes. In a time when we're often urged to speak louder, Barron chose to meet tension not with words, but with simple, quiet strength. His action didn't demand attention, but it drew it all the same. That moment wasn't about anger, it wasn't about right or wrong, it was about something much deeper. Barron's choice to remain calm, to simply be present with his father, held more power than any words could have. Think about that. In moments of conflict, how often do we rush to speak, to explain, to correct? How many times have we felt the pressure to respond in anger, to make sure our point is heard? And yet, sometimes, the most effective way to handle a situation is not by adding to the noise, but by standing firm in our own silence. What does that say about how we handle our own challenges? When was the last time you chose not to react in the heat of the moment, and instead, took a step back and let your actions speak for you? Can we learn to find strength and calmness, even when everything around us feels chaotic? Barron's example offers a lesson in restraint. In a time when everything feels like it's about to explode, maybe it's the quiet moments that hold the greatest power. The question is, can we take that lesson into our own lives? How might it change the way we face conflict, and how might it change the way others see us? So, how would you have handled that moment? Would you have reacted the same way Barron did, or would you have been tempted to speak up, to defend or confront? What do you think Barron's calm response did for everyone else in that room? Did it change their perspective, or perhaps even make them question how they handle conflict in their own lives? Take a moment to reflect on that. Have you ever been in a situation where staying silent or simply being present was the best way to respond? Maybe you were tempted to say something, but your silence ended up saying more than words ever could. How did that feel? What was the outcome? At the end of the day, Barron didn't need to say a word. His actions spoke volumes. In a world where noise often drowns out meaning, his quiet response was a reminder that silence, stillness, and restraint can sometimes carry more weight than anything else. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on more stories that leave a lasting impact. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.